All right, Chapter 12, States and Cultures in East Asia from 800 to 1400. And there's 5 sections in this chapter that we're going to go over. The first is dealing with the medieval Chinese economic revolution. The second one is China during 3 dynasties. Then we're going to look at Korea, and then we're going to look at Japan, and then we're going to end with the samurai and the shogunate. So the medieval Chinese economic revolution, it lasts from 800 to 1100. And Chinese historians, they have viewed the rise and fall of dynasties in what they have identified as this dynastic cycle. So the cycle, it was predictable, beginning with the dynasty's growing strength, the avoidance of paying taxes by the well-off, and the eventual decline of power. Chinese political theorists considered a strong centralized power the best way to form an organized government. Chinese economic commercialization improved with agricultural prosperity, which increased marketing of Chinese products, and this led to the first establishment of paper money. As trading increased, merchants organized and set up joint stock companies with shareholders and managers. Sounds a lot like what the English are going to do in the English colonization of the Americas. We have joint stock companies in the beginning. So this should hopefully be a little bit familiar to you. During the Song dynasty, Chinese sea navigation improved with the invention of the compass. Chinese manufacturers began mass production that created iron armor in traditional sizes of large, medium, and small. The average Chinese citizen benefited from the economic revolution, especially farmers who produced sugar, tea, mulberry leaves, and cotton. Farmers who could not pay their debts had to sell their land, and if they still owed money, then they had to begin selling their daughters. Very quickly going to switch over and talk about some more dynasties in China from 960 to 1368. So Taozu, he is the founder of the Song dynasty, and he retired his military generals and made them government officials in an effort to curb their power. Military problems remain, though, as the Khitans to the north threaten the border. The Song made a peaceful treaty that forced them to make annual payments in gold and silk. But the Song are going to ally themselves with the Jurchens to defeat the Khitans. When the Jurchens realized how easy it was to defeat the Khitans, they moved against the Song and defeated them also. The Lao and Jin states were multi-ethnic empires which adopted many elements of Chinese statecraft to rule their Chinese subjects. As many Jurchens moved into Chinese territory, it became difficult to preserve that cultural identity. The scholar official class was certified through an extensive examination system that was based on competitive writing. Examination preparations included memorizing classics to the point of knowing even the most obscure passages. Printing with movable type helped to increase the number of better educated elite when printing lowered the price of books. The educated members of society produced love songs, histories, artistic calligraphy, and paintings of landscapes. Confucian thought experienced a revival of interest, establishing Neo-Confucianism. Confucian teachers urged students to focus on attaining wisdom, which they considered as a higher goal than simply studying for the civil exams. So to give you an idea of where all of these empires kind of springing up and popping up, here's Song China, right? Remember, we've already talked about Korea. We're going to switch over and talk about Japan in a little bit. And 200 years later, kind of consolidating places, the Mongols are going to come in and take over to the north. We can see these empires moving and shifting over time. We just talked about, this art production and movable type, and I want to give you some examples of the art production that's coming out from this time period. The detail, just the amount of detail, like at first, you can see the main figure here, but then look at the birds, and then also look at this person in the background. Very detailed, very beautiful artwork. And then also the features just amazes me. And but this is entitled Preparing for a Feast. Well, let's talk about women for just a second. So, affluent families kept their wives and daughters concealed behind walls. Women maintained the domestic work of tending to children and weaving. Marriages were arranged with the average age of the woman being between 16 and 20. One goal was to match families of equal societal status. Young bride was expected to please her mother-in-law quickly by producing a male child. Concubines were considered to be acceptable for men, not really a big deal, although wives do outrank concubines. They were jealous and considered them to be competition. We're also going to see women begin binding their feet with strips of cloth as young girls to inhibit the growth of their feet. The Chinese believed that small feet were beautiful. I want to skip ahead and show you binding of the feet. These are girls, you can tell how tiny their feet are. Then when you take those shoes off, that's what they actually look like. So you can tell the toes are curled up under, the big toe is pointed. So it really is deforming of the feet. It's not necessarily making them smaller, it's just wrapping them so that they fit into these tiny shoes. I want to give you a visualization of that. We're going to go back and continue talking about the dynasties in China though. By the end of the Tang Dynasty, severe deforestation, it really led to disruption, including soil erosion. Erosion caused the Yellow River to become full of silt, and silt settling to the bottom of the riverbed caused the river to slowly rise and also threaten flooding. One devastating flood occurred in 1084, and it affected nearly 1 million people. So we're going to see some attempts to control the flow of the river, but that only led to further environmental destruction. Let's talk about Korea for a few minutes. So the Shia dynasty declined after the king was killed, and many of the kings who followed also met very violent deaths until the Goryeo dynasty emerged. And that dynasty not only instituted exams on the same premises of China, but they also included exams for the Buddhist clergy. The number of slaves and other members of lower class increased, and the government was also involved in owning slaves to work in state-owned mines. Monasteries became major centers of art, learning as the Buddhist faith continued to grow stronger throughout Korea. There is going to be a major overthrow of the Goryeo dynasty, and the Tuo family came to power. However, they also compromised the king to remain on the throne. Later, the Mongols were going to be able to conquer Korea, and they sent the powerless Korean king to Beijing. When the Mongol power began to fade in China, their hold on Korea also began to fall apart. Wooden blocks used for printing. You can see there it's not like each individual character is on a wooden block, but instead like whole pages are on a wooden block, but it makes it easier to print and to disseminate information a lot quickly and at a lower cost. Alright, let's talk about Japan's Heian period from 794 to 1185. So the political management of Japan was taken over by the Fujiwara family, who supplied the royal political figure. To counter the Fujiwara power monopoly, the cloistered government developed when emperors who did not have Fujiwara mothers abdicated but controlled their sons on the throne. Go back and read a little bit more about cloistered governments and how those function. I think it'll make more sense when you read the book about it. Japanese, the aristocracy presentation of dress and culture was more important than skills with horses or swords. The Japanese established their phonetic style of writing script with characters simplified from Chinese characters. Japanese epic tales, and literary masterpieces, and one of those is the Tale of Genji. So we do have kind of like what it was like to be and how to really the epitomized style or the epitomized life of Japan by these epic tales and masterpieces. We do have esoteric Buddhism, and it developed with a focus on the secrets of enlightenment being transmitted from the Buddha and accessed through the mandals and the mantras, etc. And this is from the Tale of Genji, a depiction. And also, if you go through, you can read excerpts from this in your book if you want to know more about this epic tale. But let's talk about the samurai. And the emergence of the samurai, that was caused by private landowners. And think of the samurai as kind of equivalent or similar to European knights. The samurai honor was identified as Bushido, which was a code of conduct that each samurai was expected to follow, kind of like the same as chivalry that European knights were expected to follow. Yoritomo founded the Kamakura shogunate and assigned military governors to oversee the provinces and enforce the law. The Kamakura government had a difficult time finding resources to build defenses against the Mongol threat, but it was able to stop their 2 invasions. And we're going to see the shogunate, it's going to be destroyed by Go-Daigo, but lost followers, it's going to allow a new shogunate to eventually come into power. So it's not necessarily going away just yet. Just giving you an example here, a statue of Yoritomo in court dress, so you get an idea of kind of what he looked like. Another map for you, this one of Japan, kind of focusing more on that. You can see the Mongol invasions, the 2 attempts, and remember the Japanese are able to hold them off on both of these attempts. Zen Buddhism became very popular during the Kamakura shogunate, and this form of Buddhism focused on truths and meditation. The literature entitled The Tale of Heike explained the fall of the Hira family and the rise of the Minamoto power. Under the control of the Kamakura shogunate, agricultural production increased with new strains of rice that could be double cropped in Japan's warmer regions. As the Chinese economy grew in the 11th century, trade with Japan became significant for Japan's own economic growth. Economic growth in Japan, it's also going to lead to deforestation, although it was not as severe as that in China. So this is just some illustrated scroll from some illustrated scrolls, the night attack on the Central Palace. So this was drawn during the 13th century. But just to kind of summarize what we've been talking about in this unit, East Asia faced many internal and external challenges, really during the years of 800 to 400, and the ways that societies responded to them, it's really going to help shape their history, right? So in China, the first 4 centuries of this period saw like economic growth, urbanization, the spread of printing, the expansion of the educated class, and in Korea and Japan, we see the really this aristocracy having dominance, like the ruling elite having dominance, and military rule were more typical of the era. A lot is happening in other parts of Asia during these centuries too, and we're going to talk about that in chapter 13. Inner Asia is going to see the rise of pastoral nomads. We're going to see the Turks and then later the Mongols, and both originated in the region of Mongolia, and they would come to raid and later conquer a lot of lands throughout Europe and also Asia. So kind of keep that in mind. More remote parts of the Pacific, such as Australia, they're going to develop much more on their own, but we are going to see kind of the spread and interconnectivity between India, Asia, and Europe during the next phase of history.